Hello everyone, this is Bonfire Madigan. We're not crazy, the system is. Tune into the Radical Mental Health Show hosted by the Freedom Center, Wednesday nights, 6 to 7 p.m. on Valley Free Radio, WXOJ 103.3 FM.
And this is the Mental Health Show from the Freedom Center. I'm Will Hall, and joining me is my co-host, Oryx Cohen.
Say hello. How you doing, y'all?
Well, we've got a good show lined up for you today. I am very honored to introduce John McCarthy, and I'm not quite sure how to introduce you. You're actually Mindfreedom International's representative to the United Nations.
From Ireland.
Doesn't that sound absolutely wonderful? It makes me feel important. I don't know about the rest of you out there. It's a great title. Yeah, I did act as Mindfreedom's representative in the United Nations back in January when I arrived in the US.
Do you want to say a little bit about what Mindfreedom is for people who may not know?
Well, Mindfreedom is an organisation made up something like your organisation is, except that they're spread in 100 different countries now. And a guy called David Oakes founded it over in Eugene, Oregon. He's based over there. And you'll find it on the web under mindfreedom.org. So it's readily available to anybody that wants to come and join it. The only criteria, again, is that you have to have gone nuts like I did, and you have to live with the normality of madness. I noticed that you were struggling badly to give yourself a title. And
the whole consumer thing.
I said to somebody one evening at home back in Ireland that I was a patient, and she said, "I beg your pardon, but you're not." And I said, hold on a second. I said, I was in hospital. I had a doctor looking after me. I had a nurse looking after me. I think I was a patient. She said, no, you're a client of the service.
A client, yeah.
And at that moment, I decided that I was just quite simply nuts. And the fact that I'm nuts, there's nothing whatsoever wrong with me. I'm very normally mad. And I live with the normality of madness every day in my life. I have recovered from it, which is something that I'm extraordinarily proud of. And I will not allow society ever again to stigmatize me or to make me feel inadequate or to make me feel less than anybody else, because I went into madness and I came back out of it. And I came back out of it a better person than I went in. And it was a very painful, a very degrading experience when I was in there, because I lost my will and I lost my spirit. But the learning process of coming back out of it is a hugely rewarding process. And I'm damned if anybody is ever again going to tell me that I need to be ashamed of being very normally mad. So we need to get away from society's problems. They're not our problems. I don't have any problem with all the very normally mad people I know. They're wonderful people. Society has a problem with us. Society needs to adjust itself to our normality.
So what is it that you went through? I know people may have different kinds of stereotypes about what madness is, but what was it for you, and what is it for you in terms of what experience that you went through?
With me, and I think it is with most people. There's a phrase in the Bible that I've adopted. And I'm certainly no Christian, and I certainly wouldn't be avowing religion as any kind of, in any shape or form. But Christ himself was a very wise and loving, caring guy. And he used one very significant short piece. He said, love thy neighbour as thyself. And the second part of that has been forgotten and ignored. And I never had the facility to love myself. And I was never granted the privilege within the household I grew up in and within the society I grew up in to be proud of being me. It was always a conditional thing. I had to be impressed, or I had to do what other people expected of me, rather than just having that quiet thing that some people have. My wife has it. My wife is born with a facility to be very caring of herself. And it's the most unselfish thing that you can possibly do. And if you can love yourself unselfishly, then you can't fall into sadness like I fell into sadness. And the reason I fell into sadness, and I became emotionally upset, and I lost myself, and I lost the facility to love myself in any way. And therefore, I became very depressed. I became suicidal. And I lost value for everything to do with my life. And it was that simple thing that I just hadn't and was not allowing myself the facility to love myself unconditionally. If you love yourself unselfishly and unconditionally, and society very often doesn't allow people to do that, and then people become emotionally upset, and then society segregates them, stigmatizes them, and discriminates against them for what. And I'm not saying this was all society's fault, not for 1 minute. I mean, I was at fault here. Whatever. Doesn't matter whose fault it was. The matter of the fact is that the reality of it is that most of the people I know that are so-called psychologically unwell just haven't got the facility to love themselves unconditionally, and therefore it's like kids with this ADDH or whatever the hell it is. I mean, the attention deficit is with the parents. The parents need to look to themselves and see why these kids are being so intelligent to dream up this way of attracting the attention that they're screaming for, that the parents aren't giving them or that society isn't giving them. It's a very modern illness, and it's something that you, in this country, want to look very carefully and very hard at, because they're going to medicate your kids into a compliance that they will never recover from.
So if people are just tuning in, this is the Freedom Center Mental Health Show. We're speaking with John McCarthy. And for those of you who were listening earlier, we did have some problems with free speech radio news. We weren't able actually to broadcast it, so that's why we had some music going before the show. So we apologize for that, volunteer radio station. So sorry about that. But free speech radio news and our regular news program will be on the air tomorrow night. So.
Will, do you mind if I ask a question?
Yeah,
I think
ask on, brother.
I think some of our listeners may be interested in what the mental health system is like in Ireland, and kind of what you're up to in Ireland, and kind of what the picture looks like there. We actually met you, Will and I met you in Killarney a couple months ago, which was great, a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So do you maybe want to talk a little bit about what's going on there?
Well, I suppose I could sum it up in one word: disastrous. Absolutely disastrous. I mean, as I've discovered, the mental health system in this country is, and it's disastrous for one very simple reason. It's disastrous because there is an over-reliance on the medical model of treatment. And let me state something before the phones or somebody goes gaga at the other end, if there's anybody out there listening. I am not anti-medication, and I am not anti-psychiatry. If it works for you, the blessings of God on you, stay on your meds, stay with your psychiatrist, and keep going. If you're living comfortably with your sadness, your emotional distress, your madness, whatever you want to call it, and you're doing it under the guise of the medical model, and you're doing it under the guise of psychiatric care, the blessings of God in you. But please do not tell the 50% of us who cannot survive within that system that we have to keep our mouths shut in order for you to be comfortable, because I refuse to be uncomfortable for the sake of your comfort. We cannot live, and it very nearly killed me. I became most suicidal when I was under the care of a psychiatrist and when I was under heavy medication. And the heavier the medication, the more suicidal I became. That is not coincidental. When my wife and my children came to see me when I was locked up for a year in a psychiatric hospital in Ireland, I shuffled down the corridors with saliva hanging out of my mouth, with my tongue lolling, and I developed the shakes. And I was in a sad, sad state. I now danced 9,000 miles around this country with my wife over the last 3 months. We drove 9,000 miles around this country, the two of us, and we have had a ball. And I don't take medication, and I don't see a psychiatrist. There is nothing wrong with me physically. There never was anything wrong with me physically. So why was I developing tardive dyskinesia? So if you are surviving and you are doing well on your medication, I do wish you well. And I ask you to please keep going. But if you're not, look to yourself. Look to yourself. And look for these guys here, because they're looking to try and give you some other way of dealing with what is, very simply, sadness, emotional distress, and most very often just simple loneliness. What is it like in Ireland? It's a disaster because of the very fact that there is no alternative. and you can't get funding for the alternatives. And if there is anybody struggling out there, they're doing it by the seat of their pants. They're doing it by raising charity funds here and there. There's no state interventions. There's no state help, because the psychiatric profession and the medical model and the Department of Health will not give credence or any kudos to those who are coming up with any kind of alternatives.
Sounds very familiar to us in the United States.
It's right across the board. We're no different. And they'll tell you then, we're closing down the large institutions. Oh, hey, how great is that? We're closing down the large institutions and we're opening up community services. But all they're doing is that they're taking you out of a big house, they're putting you into a small house, and they're jugging your ass anyway.
It's a mini hospital. Mini hospitals.
Mini hospitals, yeah. I mean, it just doesn't work. We did an interesting experiment. I told you this when you were in Killarney, where we opened a house down in a town called Charleville in North Cork, and it's important that this is noted, where people who were being discharged from hospital anyway were going to be brought in, and they were going to be given a facility where they could adjust back into the community. And the neighbours picketed it for 6, 7, 8, 9 months, 24 hours a day, until the state withdrew the funding and the whole experiment had to stop.
The neighbours were just totally against it.
It wasn't as simple as that now. I'll just paint you a little picture. I walked down that street with a colleague who had just come out of hospital. There was a picket 6 inches from my face, and I mean 6 inches, telling me, get out, stay out. There was a picket 6 inches from my shoulder. There was a picket behind my back and a picket at the other side of the lady I was walking with, in silence, telling us to get out, stay out. And they were, of course, then walking down the street, and it's the most insulting thing that's ever happened to me. Well, it really was, Oryx, the most insulting thing that ever happened to me. There was another lady telling her kids to get off the street because we were coming. The implication, of course, that with mental illness, there's also paedophilia, and there's also all sorts of violence and murder and mayhem, and it's all going to be attached, and it's the same old bullshit story that goes on everywhere. And they stopped it. They killed that experiment. And the shame of it all is that the state allowed it to be killed, and they withdrew the funding because the neighbours kept up their insistent protest. So how is it in Ireland? It's awful. Is there rays of hope out there? Of course there is. Of course there is. Are there people trying like you are? Of course they are. But are they getting the help they need? Are they getting the funding they need? Are they getting the facilities they need? Of course they're not. Of course they're not. And I keep going to these conferences and I keep asking people, why do mental hospitals smell? Do you ever notice mental hospitals always smell? There's always a body odour in a mental hospital. I go into the General Hospital in Cork and there's a mental ward, so-called mental ward. It always smells. I go into any other of the wards and they're pristine. They're pristine. And I broached this to I play golf with 2 consultants, and they were walking down the corridor of this hospital.
You play golf, John?
I play golf.
Oh, Oryx plays golf.
I play golf, and I'm very upset with John.
Why is that? Because I didn't take you golfing in Kerry?
Yes, and because...
It might have reminded you so that you were over there, you were supposed to be working. You were supposed to be having fun. You were supposed to be working.
You had an opportunity to have a lifetime membership at Ballybunion Golf Course.
Oh, I did. But I'm mad. That's my excuse. I'm nuts. And I didn't take it up.
This is called a tangent. Journalism. So let's get back on topic. You were talking about the ward and the odor of the ward.
When I approached these 2 consultants, one of them said to me, but John, it's my experience that mental hospital wards always smell. And therein lies another truism. It has become acceptable, and the staff have become immune to the conditions that they live and work in. And it's as sad for the staff as it is for the patients. Yeah. It really is, because they have just become immune. They do not see the wrong that they're doing.
It's like the situation with restraints and seclusion. It's just so normal, that everyone accepts this culture of violence.
My friend Helena, a 63-year-old grandmother, was dragged out of her home recently under the order of a doctor. This is her 73rd readmission. If you need an instance of a failure of any system, Helene is it 73 times. Can I say butt on the radio?
Say
Thank you very much. Helene's crime in Ireland is that she's a pain in the butt. She goes around making a nuisance of herself, right? She goes into, what do you call them here, pharmacies, yeah? She goes into chemist shops and she tells them they can't sell contraceptives because it's against the rules of the church, right? So they should lock up the Pope, okay? Because he's saying exactly the same thing. She said God speaks to her. George Bush should now be locked up because God also spoke to him. And she says things about the Catholic religion that the Pope would be proud of her, but she's making a nuisance of herself. And she is a pain in the butt. There's no doubt about it. She drives me nuts at times. But she's locked up.
Yeah, you've just described several people I know in Northampton who get locked up just because they're a nuisance.
What they do then, though, is because she refuses to take the medication, 4 nurses who are trained to hold her down on her face will lie her down. A doctor will come in and pull down her underwear and inject her with Handler, which is giving her tardive dyskinesia. They know it, we know it, and we go in and we protest it, and we can't have our voice heard. And there is no legal recourse for us to stop them doing what they're doing because they know best. Now, that's just morally wrong.
Yeah,
it might be legally correct, but it is morally wrong
and
to
this
treat
is not
any
just
human being
this is not just one of those things that's happening in those other places. I mean, we had Louis Laputri was on the show just a few weeks ago. Exactly the same thing happening to him in this community. I mean, he's been forcibly drugged to the point of having diabetes from his drugs, and we're doing everything that we can to try and stop it, but they just keep doing it. So this is happening throughout the mental health system, whether it's Ireland or the U.S.
And it's a worldwide thing because psychiatry is a worldwide thing, and psychiatry is a very unified body, and it works very well together, and it does an awful lot of good work. That has to be said. It does an awful lot of very good work, but it does an awful lot of very bad work as well. I don't know. I question society. I keep questioning society, and I think we have to keep questioning society very hard about its role here, because we have a bridge in Cork called Patrick's Bridge, St. Patrick's Bridge. It spans the main river. And it's the focal point for people who are on the street, people who are down and out. And they sit. And Cork is a cold place in the winter. The wind blows down that river. And it's a cold, icy, damp wind. And it blows down that river, and they sit with their backs to the wind with a Coca-Cola cup in front of them begging. Now, statistically, it has been proven, because the research has done, that 60% of them are suffering from so-called mental illness. If society saw that, and those 60% were suffering from cancer, TB, were suffering from heart disease, were suffering from any other quantifiable illness, it would be cause an absolute and complete outrage. But society, as much as the staff in the psychiatric units, have conditioned themselves to have this to be socially acceptable. And society needs to challenge itself as to why it can walk past these people with impunity and say that, look, there's nothing we can do for them. Because there are things that you can do for them if you open your hearts, and you open your minds, and you open yourselves up to receive them as fellow human beings who have a different way of reacting to things, who have a different way of thinking about things. And it's perfectly normal.
Yeah, you can start by recognizing that they exist.
That would help.
Giving them eye contact and saying hello.
Or sit down.
And
just stop down and sit down and go down in your hunches and say, hello, how's it going? It's cold today. Do you want to go for a cup of coffee? Cost you $1, guys. Cost you $1 and 10 minutes of your time. That's all. But I can tell you that nobody went into the psychiatric services, and if I could ask you to do one simple thing, if any of you are listening at home, and if there's 2 people in the room, put your hand out and hold the other person's hand. I'm going to hold Oryx's hand for a minute. It's the most comforting thing. It's the most comforting thing just to hold somebody, just so, Will, hold my hand. It's just a comforting thing to hold somebody's hand. I've never had a doctor or a nurse or anybody, when I've been so emotionally drained, when I have been in the saddest place I could possibly be in my life, when I had no hope, they never did that simple thing. Other patients did that for me. Other nutters, other guys who are out of their minds knew. They knew. And they did that. And we did that for each other in that place. But the staff don't do that because they're trained to be safe at a distance instead of being trained to be safe up close, which is where they need to be. They need to be close to us.
If anybody has any questions or comments for, we're speaking with John McCarthy, a mental health advocate from Ireland. Our number is 585-1033. Feel free to just give us a call here in the studio.
And also wanted to mention that John McCarthy is an author. We have his book here, a book of poetry, Hope on a Rope, A Journey from Despair to Joy. And I'd like to invite you to read a poem at any time during this interview if you want. Feel free to, or sing a song or whatever.
Okay. I'll read a poem here. This guy broke my heart. This guy literally broke my heart. I met Michael in a public mental hospital in Cork, and it was a sad place, smelly, disorganised. Michael wore clothes that didn't fit him. He wore shoes that he was walking on the heels of them. He had no teeth, because nobody thought to give him teeth in that place. Nobody talked to him, Michael was locked up when he was 21 years of age, because I got to know Michael and to love Michael. And I cry when I think of Michael. But anyway, Michael got locked up when he was 21 years of age, and he died 2 years ago at 72. He was 51 years locked up. The only problem Michael had is that Michael didn't have somebody to love him like I had somebody to love me. My wife and my children stood by me like lions, and they never stopped loving me, and that's the reason I survived, and that's the reason I recovered. Not because of medication, not because of anything else, but because I had love in my life. Michael had no love in his life. His mother and the doctor locked him in, and that was the end of him. They forgot him, and society forgot him, and he stayed there for 51 years, and he died a lousy death at the end of all of that. Carr's Hill in this poem, by the way, is the pauper's grave, and that's where they were going to bury Michael. Just, if I can, very quickly, the night I went down to claim Michael's body, because he had a sister who was ashamed of him. And she had told her children, who were young adults, who were in their 30s and 40s at this stage, that her brother had immigrated to England and disappeared because she couldn't stand the stigma of having somebody belong to her locked up in a mental hospital. And he was living 2.5 miles from where those young adults lived, and they never knew him, never met him, never saw him, never knew of his existence. And when I went in to claim Michael's body to stop him being buried, because we buried him with honour, and we buried him in a proper grave, and we gave him a proper funeral. But they had Michael in a bed in a ward with 12 adults at 1 o'clock in the morning. It was 1 o'clock when I got down there, and they never shifted the body. They had left it there. He had died at 5. I had been with him at 4. He died at 5 o'clock when I left, but I was going somewhere, so I had to turn off my mobile phone, and I didn't get word until 12 o'clock, and I got back down there at 1 o'clock. He was still in the ward, laid out. And when I pulled back the sheet, Michael's head was tied onto the back of the bed, an old iron frame bed, with a dirty bandage looped through a roll of toilet paper. And it was the perfect metaphor for the shite way they had treated the man all his life. And the other 11 patients, all Michael's friends, were wandering around in that room in a state of complete distress, and the 2 staff were down having coffee. And it was absolute cruelty in its disrespect for the man's life and the man's death. So I wrote Michael. Michael slopes along, hands rigid at his side, feet shuffled, teeth gapped, eyes staring wide, smile fixed, praying. Michael remembers 40 years ago, lunch forgotten. I didn't like Joe in 47, he'll never get to heaven. Tried to give him advice once, he snapped at me. Your father was a nice man, visit me in St. Anne regular. He's dead now, did you know? How's your mother? How's business? You're well. Michael slopes along, straw hat minus donkey's bite. 'Tis summer now, we'll sing a song. Your turn, no mine. Faith of our fathers living still. Living still in heaven, in hell, Michael queues every day for breakfast and a pill, for lunch and a pill, for tea and a pill. Michael is compliant. He's good. No trouble or Michael. Nobody talks to Michael, so he prays to the Virgin and Child. He has none. Michael is a conversationalist. How's your mother? How's business? You're well? Michael is a steady lad. He has a fixed abode, been resident for 50 years, in situ, stagnant, stagnating, without care, in care, careless. Scholarship forgotten, first in Ireland or Michael. Michael travelled to Youghal and to Grawn and London. He's proud of that. Lost a brother or he lost him. Father played trumpet blind in a band. Mother made cold cabbage sandwiches. There was no ham. Michael slopes along, heading for Carr's Hill. Who'll remember Michael? Will you? What a man for talk is Michael. How's your mother? How's business? You're well. 51 years that man lived in an institution in absolute squalor. And we are a caring, loving Christian society.
It's really
just a
powerful.
contradiction in terms.
Very powerful. I'd like to ask everybody who's listening to think about the Michaels in your life who are alive, because there are plenty of them out there, and maybe we can make a difference.
Well, I'll tell you how you can make a very simple difference. Your mental hospitals here are public institutions. Go and visit. Even if you don't know anybody there, go and visit. And if you can't make contact the first time, get over it and go again. And if you can't make contact with the person you're looking at the second time, get over it and go again and go again and go again. Because I had to go to Michael for 6 or 7 months before I could get Michael to recognise who I was, or before I could get Michael to utter a word. And I had to have the same one-sided conversations with him. But eventually we got through to each other, and eventually we became friends, and eventually I know Michael's life improved because somebody was caring that he was alive. But it was too late to get him out of there. But there are people like Michael here in your community, and just go and visit them. And if you went often enough, and if enough of us went often enough, maybe the staff would wake up to the reality of what is actually going on. If every now and again you threw I'm not asking people to go out there and have violent protests around it, but a gentle reminder that maybe some soap and water might help here. Or maybe the guy could do with a change of a shirt. Or maybe he could do with new shoes. Or maybe he could do with it puzzles me why people in psychiatric hospitals don't get their hair done, don't get their makeup done, at a time when your dignity is at its lowest. That the simple things like that, just get somebody in there to do your nails, get somebody in there to put on makeup, get somebody in to make you look good so that you might have a chance of feeling good. It's just, the simplicities are so ignored, and the simplicities are where it's really at. It ain't a complicated issue. It is just a matter of communicating your love for somebody else in a fashion that they can understand, and letting them know that there's somebody out there that cares. It breaks through a lot of barriers.
If you're just joining us, this is the Freedom Center Mental Health Show, and we're speaking with John McCarthy, who's a mental health advocate and activist from Ireland. And the number is 585-1033 if you want to call with any questions or comments.
Yeah, John, did you want to maybe talk about your visit to New York and the United Nations?
Niagara Falls.
Grand Canyon,
Niagara Falls,
Yellowstone Park,
Yellowstone.
Yeah.
Yogi Berryman. I'm a bit sad because we're coming to the end of this fantastic journey. I got this invitation.
You've been here for 3 months, right?
Yeah, this is 2.5 months now. Well, they won't let me stay any longer. You get a 90-day visa here, so I'm at the end of the 90-day visa. But we came to New York to do this thing in the United Nations, and I said, to hell with that, if we're going to come over, we might as well stay, and we hired a car. We had a good year last year, made a few bucks, and said I might as well come over and spend them. It's ironic that since I went mad, I've made more money I ever made in my life. So there's a lot of positives in it, guys. There was a good business deal last year done in, I'm in real estate at home, retired from it now. But so we came over here to spend the money. And hired a car, a Chevy Impala, which is very impressive. I'm delighted with it anyway. If there's anybody from Chevy listening out there, I could take one. I could take one home if you wish, and introduce the Impala to the Irish market for you. And we just drove around. We've been lost for 2.5 months because we haven't had a destination on any given day. We don't know where we're going to go. We don't know where we're going to end up. I mean, we sort of driving along, and we said, Niagara Falls is only 1,500 miles up. Let's go to Niagara Falls. And we did, and crossed into Canada. We stood at the edge of the Grand Canyon, travelled a little bit on a train, and met a beautiful lady called Clark, who was an African-American storyteller, and she regaled us with some beautiful stories for 5.5 hours. Stood in San Francisco in terrible sadness at the amount of people that were homeless on the street, as there was in Montreal. A huge amount of people in both of those cities, more than anywhere else they've been. Absolutely loved the rudeness and directness of New York. Absolutely loved it. You know, it's just fantastic. You know exactly where you are in New York. But there is no pretense. Find it a little difficult to get a handle on. There's maybe sometimes a bit too much sincerity in some of the people that you meet, and you wonder how sincere the sincerity actually is.
Yeah, too much sincerity. That sounds like America.
Yeah, you know, there's a big flash of white teeth, but you know, and you look at the eyes, there's blankness. You know?
Yeah. Interesting. It's our national psychosis.
Yeah.
And you came here for the United Nations Disability Convention. Is that?
Yeah,
is
there's
that
a
right?
new. There's a new. It's ironic that there's a convention being written on the rights of the disabled, and I am now classified as disabled. I don't know whether you are here in this country, but I am in my country classified as disabled. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not too sure how I actually feel about that. I can see the sense in it in some ways, and I can see the nonsense about it in other ways.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not 100% comfortable with. It's not so much the title, because I don't care what you call me. I've got way beyond that. It's the use of the title that some people are making of. And we stood there, and I suppose we had three basic points. We wanted it written into the convention. And I'd be using the word forced in each one of these, and the word forced is the only one that's relevant. We wanted it written in that it was morally wrong to force somebody to take medication, that it was morally wrong to force somebody to use electric shock treatment, and that it was morally wrong to incarcerate somebody forcefully against their will. That would seem to me to be a given, that those things are morally wrong. I mean, it cannot be morally correct to tie me to a table and put 2 electrodes onto my forehead and put 100 volts of electricity through my brain and tell me that it's for my good, when I'm telling you I don't want to take it. Under any other circumstances, in any other sphere of life, that could not possibly happen. But it can happen, and again, by some extraordinary PR, because it is one of the best PR jobs that has ever been put across in life. People, when they hear mental illness and they hear it's for your own good, so stop complaining and just lie down and take it. And it's socially acceptable for people to have this kind of irrational thinking. And I came across the age-old things. What do you do with the guy? Okay, let's say you're right. Let's say it's morally incorrect. I'll just tell you what happened. I mean, there's 196 countries represented here, 5 or 6 delegates. This is an enormous room.
This is all in New York City.
In New York City, in the United Nations building itself, right? This is outside of the General Assembly. This is I think the biggest conference room in the UN. It's an enormous room. It's got its bank of microphones, and you put on your headphones, and there's 10 different languages and interpreters all over the place, and there's a big podium where the chairman is sitting up. It's very intimidating in the first instance of it, until you get to rationalise that this is just people talking. Yeah, it's just different languages, and they're talking. And it wasn't so much that they were talking German or French or Russian or Chinese or Spanish or English. It was the fact that they were talking diplomatese and they were talking legalese, which are really foreign languages. And these guys were fluent in using language that was superfluous to need. And anyway, I sat in there for the first 2 days and I listened. And I just realised I was in the wrong place, that I had no business there. So I went outside the door. And as the delegates came in, I lobbied them on my 3 points. And got to know a lot of them very well, and made friends with an awful lot of them. But it all came back down to the same thing. What do you do with the person who's a danger to himself? And what do you do with the person who's a danger to society?
Yeah, harm to self, harm to others. Yeah. Dangerous, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just before I go into that, the absolute truth of the matter is that the amount of people with so-called mental illness who are violent is minuscule in the overall amount of people who suffer with so-called mental illness. And the graph of people who commit violent acts with so-called mental illness is in the decline, whereas the violence within so-called normal society is vertical. It's going up. It's not going up in a graduated scale. It's nearly vertical. It's going up that quickly. So we are the least violent members of society, but we are the most abused legally by the legal system and the medical system in our all mutual societies. And it's very ironic that it works in the opposite way. So my answer to them was very simple. Most of these guys smoked. And then I said, you're out there. I said, you're smoking cigarettes, you're going to kill yourself. We know you're killing yourself because it says it on the packet. It's a government warning telling you that you're a danger to yourself, but there's nobody picking you up and locking you up. And you have a big problem.
Unless you're smoking marijuana.
Right, yeah, which is not going to do any harm anyway, but different subject.
That's another show, John. Another show.
But I mean, the guy who's eating himself into obesity, who's 28 stone, he's walking down the street and the doctors are telling him absolutely categorically that he is going to die of a heart attack. His body cannot sustain the damage that he is inflicting on himself, the harm he is doing to himself.
Yeah.
Nobody is picking up and locking him up for his own good. But with me, they can pick me up in advance of my doing anything to harm myself because somebody says I may commit an act to harm myself. So, there's no logic in it. There is no logic in it. The second one is being harm to society, and we have a problem there. If I get a mad attack of psychosis later on tonight in a public place and I pick up a knife and I brandish it and I threaten people, then I should be subjected to the full rigour and the normality of the law. There and then. I should be arrested, I should be taken to court, and I should be charged with committing a violent act. No excuses, no hiding behind lunacy acts, no hiding behind the lunacy defence or whatever. It just should be that. But, in as much that if I robbed a bank and I ran out in the street with the loot and I fell down on the ground with a heart attack with the strain of it, I would be subjected to the full rigour of the law, but I would be taken and given the proper treatment for my heart failure before I was taken in front of the court. And that is exactly what should happen to somebody who's got an attack of psychosis or whatever that causes them to become violent. Then they should be given the full rigour and the normality of the law. Our problem is that we're denied access to the law. We're denied access to the law because a lot of people in our situation want to hang on to the lunacy defence. And the law certainly wants to hang on to it because it is used and abused by normal society in a huge way.
Yeah,
it's to our detriment.
It just becomes the best defense. Like, well, I'm going to get X number of years if I'm criminally indicted, and I'm going to get probably less years if I'm declared insane. Mm-hmm. So my lawyer will argue that I'm insane. I mean, it just becomes an instrumental thing rather than any kind of reality.
If you put that will into its context as to what it does with us within the public perception.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So now a person like I myself stating that I live with the normality of madness, I generate fear at times in some people who don't understand what the hell I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the fear that comes out of us being abused like that. So we can't hide behind that anymore. We have to declare the normality of it, and we have to just get on with it. And I think there was an impression made at the UN. Is there going to be a radical change? I don't think so. But it can't have done any harm. And there's another session coming on again in August, which I hope to go back to. So we'll see what happens then.
John, we've got somebody on the phone. See if we can. Caller, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Did you have a question for John McCarthy?
Oh, I didn't have a question. I had a comment.
Okay, go ahead.
I work in a facility that cares for mentally ill. And it's a dual diagnosis facility. They have to have mental illness and medical problems. And I wanted to make a comment about the staff and their care for the residents. I have never seen more caring people in all my day. When I came to this facility that I work at in Turners Falls, I was amazed at the care. Every one of those residents are loved, and they are cared for. It's very, very enlightening. And I don't know if you've been to a facility where you've observed caring staff, because I heard your comments about them not having the care, not having their hair done, and not being clean. And we make a very, very huge effort to treat every single one of those residents with love and dignity.
Okay, thanks for
No,
your.
so can I reply to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, can I get you? I didn't get your first name. I'm sorry.
My name is Sue.
Sue, how are you, Sue?
Very well.
Can I say to you, well done to you, and thank you very, very much.
That was
And
my
it's-
response.
and
It's like, that's great,
It's wonderful to hear
you.
that, Sue. And if that was the general ethos around, we wouldn't have as much of the problem as we have. But unfortunately, Sue, not enough places like yours exist. They just don't exist, and I can't praise you enough, and I can't thank you enough for doing what you're doing. But
Well, it
you
takes-
also
it
have,
takes
you
a
also have, if I could say this much though, Sue, you also have a function to look to the people who aren't doing their job as you're doing it, because you're on the inside. You're on the inside, and you have so much more influence and access than people like the three of us who are trying to get at it from the outside. And I would appeal to you to use your position and to use that. I can hear the love in your voice and the emotion in your voice. I would appeal to you to use that to try and get your fellows who aren't doing what they should be doing correctly to change and do it the way you're doing it. And again, thank you so much for doing it.
Yeah, come and join the Freedom Center. We have a long-standing relationship with a number of mental health staff, and we always make a point of pointing out that we're not talking about the entire mental health system. We're not talking about every single staff person. We're not talking about everybody's experience. But that's usually what happens, is that people respond to us by saying, "Oh, you're making a generalization of everybody," and that's really not what we're doing. We work actively. So there are psychiatric survivor groups out there that don't work with staff and don't form collaborative relationships and don't welcome staff to be part of our work, but we do. And so I would just totally extend an invitation to you to get involved with the Freedom Center. We could form a relationship with you, and we'd like to find out more about where you work and make connections and do the kind of collaboration and alliance building that needs to happen.
And where are you located?
We are in Northampton, and we unfortunately don't have enough money for any kind of office or facility ourselves. But if you go to our website, which is freedom-center.org, there are a number of groups that we have. We have a support group, we have a writing group, we have our acupuncture clinic and yoga class, a number of events that are coming up, including the Law and Psychiatry training series. So I just invite you to get involved. Let's meet and talk further about this.
I would love that.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Well done to you, Sue.
Yeah.
And you
Well
can
done.
call
And-
us too. You can call us at 582-9948.
9948?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, and
Okay.
thank you for doing what you're doing. God bless you.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's interesting. I think that's a good example of where we go from this. Is we start with a lot of intense emotions and a lot of difficult stories, and then there's a response, often from staff or from people in the system, and there's suspicion and there's difficulty and there's pain, and there's like, wait a second, are you pointing the finger at all of us? And we're good people, and what we're here to do is to build the bridges and to try and create some alliances. And if we can get these conversations happen, I'm really thrilled with that call. That was pretty
Yeah.
cool. I hope she follows up on that. We can
But
find out
it's
more.
exactly what we need, because
Yeah.
you see, I don't know, maybe I didn't clarify it properly, but I didn't amplify it enough, but we need to cooperate. It's not a them and us. It's not us as survivors and them as staff. That's never going to work. That is never going to work. It has to be. But like, if I could say to people like Sue, that we're never ever going to get in. I've addressed every university in Ireland. The minute I go home, I'm addressing another university, a conference in my home city of Cork. The only place I've never been invited, and I've asked, is to any one of the teaching units for psychiatry. And they just will not give the survivors a proper voice. And I have an expertise, and this is why when Will and Oryx asked me earlier on to talk about my story, you see, my story is about my experience, and it's personal to me, and while it's useful to have and it's useful to hear, it doesn't allow for my expertise. And I don't have an experience anymore. And my expertise is not medical. It's not as a social worker. It's not as a nurse. But it is no less valid because I have recovered. And I have been strong enough to face this and to recover from it. And I will demand my due respect. And I will demand my due acknowledgement of my expertise. And it is in a different area to all of the other specific areas. But I went through my own experience of university, the university of being an inpatient and an outpatient of the services that let me down as a human being. And that gave me a level of expertise that the people, if they had the open-mindedness and the open heart to listen to what they're not doing, they may just learn something very significant about what they should be doing and not perpetuate what they are doing. Because I went to university to do my course in psychology, and I went to do a course in human relationships, and I took diplomas in both of them. And I learned one very significant thing, that it's a great sign of intelligence to take a complicated subject and make it simple. And it's a great sign of stupidity to do the opposite. And unfortunately, the world is full of arrogant academics who do the opposite of human experiences, and they have to make it extraordinarily complicated so that nobody can understand what the hell they're talking about by the time they finish with it.
Yeah, I think that sums up psychology, I think,
A
in
lot
a lot
of
ways.
it. A lot of it. And it's just that if you go with a simple message, they don't want to hear. If you make it a very convoluted and academically acceptable experience, then they'll sit down and listen. But you go in with the simplicities of life, and that's quite dismissed. And it's time that the people who are out there woke up to the reality of what they're doing. Woke up to the reality. Do you see? Because, like, if I could address the people who are not working in the public areas, who are drawing their salaries but not working, and this is not at the people who are working, but those that are not working. You work for me. My taxes pay your salary. I am your boss. And you need to sit back and take note and listen to what your bosses are trying to tell you. And it's not the civil servants who's sitting on the chair above you or the level above you who's your boss, but it's us, Joe Soap citizen. And we will demand our voices be heard. And that's what movements like this are doing and need to continue to do. We need people like Will and Oryx through this kind of facility to let people know that we have an expertise. It ain't about our experience. It's about our learning. It's about what we have learned. And we know certain things. Not everything. Not everything. But we know certain things. Because you see, if I sit down with Will, and I know Will has come out public with this, that he's been locked up, I don't need to go through a series of meetings with Will to understand. I have an immediate rapport with Will.
That's right.
Absolutely. Same with Oryx. I have an immediate understanding because we just know.
From the first time we met.
Yeah, we just know. And it is the same thing with every one of the people, the so-called users and survivors, the nutters that are involved in my life now. I don't need to go through a series of sessions over 10 weeks or 10 hours or whatever to understand. I just understand. And they understand me, and we have an immediate rapport. That's invaluable. That is absolutely invaluable, and it is ignored to the peril of the people who are living with this problem.
It's not very complicated. I mean, it's really comes down to caring. Just comes down to just people who need care, need to be surrounded by caring people. It's very simple.
Yeah, and people who understand. And people who understand, and people who are willing to listen significantly and not tell you what's best for you.
Right.
Not keep telling you what's best for you, but listen to what you need. Mm-hmm. Listen to what your personal need is. And you see, that's why medication fails so many of us, because it tries to treat a specific. It tries to put everybody into a box of a diagnosis. And how can you do that with this particular problem? Because everybody in this particular problem is a different individual. Mm-hmm. And in so much as what caused you to become upset wouldn't upset me for a moment. And what upset me and caused me to descend into sadness would not affect any of the two of you for one moment, or anybody out there listening. It's personal, and it takes listening, and it takes attention, and it takes love. It ain't complicated.
If you're
I've got a question. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I've got a question for you. We have John McCarthy here from Mindfreedom Ireland. Just ask you just a very easy question. What do you think the cause of so-called mental illness is?
But that's where it becomes complicated, because it is each individual's reasoning, each individual's so-called weakness. But it ain't weakness. It ain't weakness. It is. I was more sensitive than anybody else in my family, right? In my family ethos, that was a weakness. And I was told to straighten myself up. Look, you cannot go around like this. And if something upsets you, you can't let it upset you. And you must be a man and you can't cry. And you have to just focus in and get on with it. And blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, when you need to be told the opposite. You need to be told the opposite. I tell you, let me give it to you in a different way. I'm sitting in Central Park on this trip. And there's a black guy playing a sax. And he's got a gift from God. This guy is striking out notes there that would tear the heart clear out here, right? Beautiful jazz music. And he's got a cup in front of him begging. And it was so ironic that the backdrop to him was the east side of Central Park, where all the multimillionaires live, where all the old money lives, where the respectability of society lives. And they produce nothing but banknotes. Absolutely nothing of any quality anywhere. And here's this guy who's producing this beautiful thing. And society has no regard for him. And unfortunately, that's the way society is. If you're tough, aggressive and successful, then you fit in. If you ain't, if you're sensitive, artistic, musical, then you're on the fringe. And if you're very sensitive, then society is going to oppress you down into, and this is not being me being a mawkish liberal or anything else, this is just a fact. This is just a fact. And when I hit a crisis point in my life, all of that denial of my sensitivities compounded into my getting depression. So I think that's where I got it from.
Does that sound familiar, Oryx, to your experience?
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds familiar to mine, for sure.
I was always told I was too sensitive.
Yeah.
You're too sensitive.
You just need to be proud of it. Do you know?
Yeah.
I mean, if we were part of some of the ancient societies, especially those of us that suffer from this so-called schizophrenia, where you hear voices, yeah, we would be called the shaman.
Yeah.
We'd be honoured because we heard the spirits, because we are the emotional leaders of the tribe, and we would be second in place to the chief.
Yeah.
Because we could go out and actually commune with nature, I mean. And we could do this, and so you would be honoured. Instead of that, you're locked up, force injected, force ECT, and you're never seen again. Boom, boom, good luck.
Yeah.
Because you're different. But we need to honour ourselves for being different. We need to take pride in being different. I mean, that's why I grew the ponytail. I grew the ponytail. If they're going to call me mad, I'm going to look it. And I'm going to be proud of it. And I'm mad and I'm proud. And you know, when I go back to Ireland, one of the things I'm doing, maybe you might do it in Northampton, I want to organise a National Nut Day. But I'll sell you a peanut for $1. And maybe you might raise enough funds to get yourselves an office, guys, because we need to get a sense of humour as well about what's going on, you know? Yeah. So anyway, I think there's somebody...
Okay, National Nut Day.
National Nut Day.
Let's do it in July.
Why not?
That's our...
Do it whenever you like, yeah. Do it whenever you like.
That's Mad Pride Month.
Mad Pride. We have just a few more minutes, but we do have a caller on the line. Caller, Caller, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, do you have a question for John McCarthy? Or?
Well, I just wanted to say a comment. You know,
sure, go ahead.
My name is Eddie Bartok Barada. I'm a Northampton poet, and you know, with by the way they diagnose, you know, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. You know, the bill that comes with that. You know, depression and high anxiety disorder. And I was just hearing John about his ponytail. And thinking about letting my hair grow.
Well done, man. Go for it.
You know, and really writing about what I feel, making music, working on sculptures, and saying, this is what I need. Mm-hmm. This is my healing space. Yeah. This is my body encoded, written on by history. And I'm in this place, and I own this thing, and I'm going to live deeply. I'm going to sing my song.
Well done.
You know, so it's you think about the people who went before you and the people I know who fell on my left and my right because they were sensitive feeling people, because they were loving people. So, to survive that and to know that we have these shadows behind us.
Give us a blast of a song, Eddie, while we have the last minute. Come on, sing us a song. Come on, right off the top of your head, Eddie. Go for it. Go on.
I could bust a poem out for you, but...
Yeah, please do.
No, give us the song. We'd love to hear the song.
Please do.
All right.
Finish with a song.
Hey, this is the red thread.
Good man.
A Chinese proverb says that we're connected at birth to all the people we're ever going to know by a simple red thread. You can see it in old color photographs, shots taken by cheap cameras. People pay money to get the red eye out, evidence of the thread. Dusk or dawn, you see it on the horizon, in the face of a winter child, a person who's upset or has been hit. Bad painters apply it to cheeks of holiday people. Surgeons work in it up to their wrists. Women carry so much of the thread that they lose some every month.
Eddie, would you call me very rude if I said to you we have 2 minutes left and I came 9,000 miles and I want the last 2 minutes?
Yes, speak to me.
Listen, thanks for the call, man.
Yeah, you guys are great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for calling.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, this has been a great
Hold on
great
a minute,
hour.
because I'm going to finish with this.
Okay, you got. Take it away, John.
Last night, as I lay dreaming of pleasant days gone by, my mind being bent on rambling, to Ireland I did fly. I stepped on board a vision and followed with the wind, till at last I came to anchor at the cross of Spancel Hill. I'll tell you guys, it's a great feeling to be nuts. I don't want you to try it, but I'll tell you, get to know some people who are, and you will be surprised at the rewards that are in it for yourselves. For yourselves, for your own souls, for your own spirits. It's uplifting. Give us a shot. We're very normally mad, and we'd love to love you if you'd only let us. Thank you, fellas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John McCarthy.
Yeah,
thank you, Oryx
so
Cohen.
much.
And we'll be back next week with the Freedom Center Mental Health Show.